Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Akshay. Were you being stopped from entering this thing?
No, sir.
You took a long time to join. So okay, can we get going?
Yes, sir.
How many are there? 7. That's a huge number. So let's go. Yeah. We're going to be talking about Louis Althusser and his theory of ideology, and your understanding of Louis Althusser will depend upon your understanding of Marx. Even though uh, Louis Althusser is somebody who um, is not in full agreement with Marx. He's somebody who differs with Marx on a few issues, but uh, completely so when it comes to ideology. He's absolutely different from Marx. So let me put some of the expressions that we used yesterday. Okay, we talked about mode of production, consisting of forces of production and two relations of production, and I told you that there is a contingent relationship between forces of production and relations of production. A certain kind of forces of production will lead to a certain kind of relations of production. If the forces of production are non-ideological, are non-hierarchical, then even the relations of productions will be non-hierarchical. If the forces of production are hierarchical, then they become, the relations also become hierarchical. And this also, I told you, is the way in which you have the extraction of surplus value in the uh, what should we say, in the capitalist economy by the capitalists through surplus labor time, which is the labor time that hasn't been paid for, uh, and yet the laborer is productive in that particular time. So I told you Marx's understanding of ideology is that which is confined to the superstructure and does not penetrate the base, and therefore is a unjustifiable explanation, and the opposite of uh, scientific explanation. I just hope you remember these things, because I'm not going to. I'm just putting these things here for you to contrast this with what Louis Althusser says. Okay. Now, unfortunately for Marx, Engels is also clubbed with him. Engels had a slightly different idea of, the concept of ideology. So, what is Engels's idea of ideology? Engels talks of ideology as being false consciousness. So this is something that I didn't talk about yesterday. So what is a false consciousness? Okay. If you call something a false consciousness, that means that it is not the correct consciousness. So what Engels says, and you find this actually uh, in Engels's writings and also in his interpretation of the second and third volumes of the Capital. Uh, see, the Capital is in 3 volumes. The German title for that is Das Kapital, Kapital, Das Kapital, the Capital. And the first volume of that was the work that Marx wrote himself, after which he died. Now, there were a lot of notes and other unpublished material of his that were lying in the drawers of his working table. And all these things were picked up and collated by Engels in order to bring out the second and third volumes of the Capital, or Das Kapital. So these are unreliable as Marx's ideas, because please remember one thing: when somebody is putting together somebody else's ideas, then they tend to interpret. They tend to interpret them as something, and the process of interpretation is probably something that leads to the loss of the original meaning that was there in the written works. So even scholars like Ralph Miliband talk about ideology as false consciousness. In fact, Engels says, and uh, Ralph Miliband also supports him. Uh, somebody, your mic is on. Could you settle down, please? Can you mute your mic, please? Thank you. Yeah. So Ralph Miliband says that ideology is deliberately inculcated into the working class to quell the revolutionary potential of that class. Okay, that is what that is basically what Ralph Miliband says. Okay, so how does ideology quell the potential for revolution? Simple. Now let's take a scenario from our current situation. Now you see those people who are capitalists and the intermediary classes. Please remember, in Marxism, there are two main classes which are adversarial when the classes come into being. In feudalism, it is the aristocracy versus the peasants or the serfs. Okay, they are the two main classes. But there are other classes in between as well. They are very small in number, and they are not of consequence to the running of society as it is, or to the changing of society from what it is to something else. So Marx will say that you can ignore these intermediary classes. Now, when it comes to capitalism, for him it is the bourgeois, the middle class, historical middle class that emerged from in between the aristocracy and the serf, and the proletariat, which is the working class. So it is a capitalist versus the worker, so to speak. Now, what you have to remember is Marx says there are other intermediary classes here, petty traders, whom he calls the petit bourgeoisie or the petit bourgeois. Okay, and he also uh, talks about uh, you know various other classes like the landless peasants who are not working in industries but still working on land. Please remember that just because it has become a capitalist industrial civilization, it doesn't mean that people stop eating food. So agricultural activity goes on. So there are the landed class still, and they are not the bourgeois. And there are the peasants who still work on the land of the landed class, but they are not consequential to the generation of social wealth as the bourgeois and the proletariat are. So, if the bourgeois and the proletariat are the two main classes, there are some intermediary classes, but let them be. They are not of much significance. Now, what Ralph Miliband says, the Engelsian idea of false consciousness was that there is an inability on the part of the proletariat to understand that it is that it can rather transform from a class in itself to a class for itself. Okay, when it is a class in itself, it is a passive entity with no realization among the members of that class that they have something in common, which is that they are all being exploited by the capitalist. So that is the class in itself. When it becomes a class for itself, then there is a realization in each and every member of the working class that they are being exploited. And for the revolution to happen, the transformation of the class from being in itself to becoming for itself is absolutely necessary. Okay, and what Engels says is ideological understanding of society comes in the way of this particular transition. How? Because the workers see uh, the workers basically see the uh, capitalist as a benefactor. Okay, they see the capitalist as a benefactor because he's giving them a job. And by giving him a job, he's ensuring that these people will basically be able to live. Doesn't matter if they're living in squalor, doesn't matter if they are living in filth. Okay, but they think that if the bourgeois class doesn't pay them that money that they are being paid for the work, they can't live even that kind of a life. So that for Engels is false consciousness. Okay, the consciousness that tells these people that somehow the capitalist is not their enemy but their benefactor. Right, you don't see this being used in Marx. Marx only says an explanation that is unscientific is ideology. He doesn't use false consciousness. False consciousness is an Engelsian term. Now, Miliband, Ralph Miliband, who's a Marxist in the 20th century, takes this idea a little further. He says ideology serves as a false consciousness at different levels, and that is why the revolution hasn't happened. Okay, he says not not only do the members of the proletariat see the capitalist as a bourgeois, as a benefactor, they also see him as somebody. They also see him as somebody who basically uh, is a reference point, and they think that one day they can also have at least some of the things that the capitalist and the intermediary classes have, which are social goods. In India, we call them goods. Okay, we see a train going and we say, this is a goods train. It's not goods, it's goods. Okay, goods is like goodies, nice things. We'll talk about that when we come to Rawls. When I finish this, we'll be going there. So there are some goods that people own. So Miliband basically says things like radio, television, which had just started coming in, and refrigerators. Now, all these things become sources of aspiration. Okay, they become sources of aspiration, which means that the worker is willing to work hard so that he and his family can also have a refrigerator, can also have a radio, and later on a television. So they start aspiring for these goods, and they think working hard is the way to acquire these goods, and therefore they don't revolt. And so Ralph Miliband basically talks about this as false consciousness. The desire to have the things that the bourgeois class and the other intermediary classes, the social goods that they have, even the workers want them. And I think I told you there was a time when a television was a luxury, a black and white television. And on Saturdays and Sundays, when Doordarshan showed films, then you would find hordes of people on the streets trying to find a house that had a television. And if there was a television, then these people would get into that house and sit on the floor and watch the movies. So initially, we also didn't have a television. So I used to go to my friend's house to watch television. And later, we bought television. And then we found that all kinds of people were coming into the house, occupying our drawing room in order to watch, basically, in order to watch the, what should I say, to watch the movie. Okay, they used to come in to watch the movie. And nobody said no to them. People were accommodative. They came and they would sit and watch. So if you look at the situation now, it has changed considerably. When we say it has changed considerably, now we do find that people, even in bastis, have televisions. That's a must. Radios are there on all phones. So the challenge came to the idea that this is false consciousness because it is achievable. So you have Louis Althusser, who is a structural Marxist, and let me explain what the structural Marxist is. He's a structural Marxist at two levels. One is that he studies language and its usage in controlling thought. Two, he talks of structures within society and state that perpetuate ideology. So he's a structural Marxist in both these senses. Okay, so let's first take up the first point. Now, what Louis Althusser does is that while he accepts the base superstructure model, he accepts it. He's not somebody who says that Madame Rekha Roy, please mute. Thank you. Yeah. So he talks about the language and how it is used in order to perpetuate what he calls the ideology of power. Okay. So for him, that is what he's saying. Ideology is for the sake of perpetuation of power in society. B. He says you have to concentrate on the superstructure which for is two tiered. Tier 1 is law and tier 2 is the political or politics, law or legal. That's what I have to write. Okay, that is the tier 1. Now he says you have to study the superstructure in both these tiers, not just club them and say legal political superstructure. Because for him, ultimately, the perpetuation of ideology happens because of these things that are there within the superstructure. Okay, so legality, draws compliance out of you. For him, where do I put that? I'll put it here somewhere so I can. Legality is contractual and binding on all, right? The Constitution, our own Constitution, has a preamble that says, "We, the people of India, have solemnly agreed." So, what is that? It's a contract. So, all legalities are contractual and therefore they are binding. And the political class which is in power will have legality as one of its weapons. So what he says is this two-tieredness, oh God, mistake, I should not have gone, or what will happen if I do, no, yeah. Okay, so what he says is that since legality is contractual and binding, you can be punished for disobedience. You can be punished for disobedience. And therefore, you draw compliance out of people and make sure that they don't revolt. Okay, that is what he says. Now, in this, let us put a point A. He says the superstructure, ideally, this should have been up above that, but it's okay. It can be put here also. The superstructure is relatively autonomous of the base. Whereas if you take into consideration the relationship that has been put in Marx, the way it's been posited, the relationship between the superstructure and the base is that the base determines the superstructure, right? Changes in the base are reflected as changes in the superstructure as well. But what Louis Althusser is saying is that the superstructure need not always change as per the changes in the basis. In fact, it has a relative autonomy, and he borrows a point from Habermas. This is a point that I'm not going to make in detail now because I'll make this point when we're doing Habermas. So what he says is that the superstructure, which is relatively autonomous, can sometimes determine the base. Okay, but even if it is not determining the base, it can still be autonomous of the base. The superstructure is relatively autonomous of the base. That is the first point he makes. How? How is it autonomous? It is, oh, Jesus Christ, what do I press? I am a right-hander with two left hands. That is my problem. It has taken me many years to realize this, but I now have realized it. Most ham-handed person in the whole world. Yeah. So how does this autonomy come into being? For that, you have to understand that the state especially, and to an extent society, basically have what he calls repressive state apparatus, they also have what he calls an ideological state apparatus. They take recourse to a word he invented. Because he invented it, I'm putting it in capitals. Interpellation. Okay. Are you with me? Is this making sense to you?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
No, sir.
No. No, I have not explained these things yet. So wait a minute. I'm asking you, have you understood that ideology is for the perpetuation of power in society?
Yes, sir.
And in order to understand that, you have to concentrate on the superstructure and not on the base. And that there are two tiers. One is legality and the other is politics.
Yes, sir.
Till there, are you clear? Are
Yes, sir.
you clear that unlike in Marx, where the superstructure is dependent on the base, here it is autonomous, relatively autonomous of the base. And that it can also influence the superstructure in the reverse direction. Okay? If you've understood that, then I can get on with the rest. Till this point, why do I point at the screen? Point A, the superstructure is relatively autonomous of the base. Okay, now, and I hope you've understood that legality, that draws compliance, because you're punished if you don't comply with laws, right? You can get punished. Let me give you one small example. When the TSRTC employees went on strike, what did Chandrasekhar Rao say? That he said their services are terminated. He used a legality. He said that the strike was unlawful. Their not turning up for work was unlawful, and therefore it was very much within the jurisdiction of the state and the government to terminate the employees of the TSRTC. You remember that? It happened recently.
Yes,
But
sir.
Yes,
yeah,
sir. We got
yeah,
10 days holidays also for that.
yeah, right. So that is how legality is used. Okay, so let me not leave that hanging. Let me also put another point here. When you are you are considered to be in breach of a legality, then there are two things that happen. One is the prospect of loss of employment if you are already employed, and not getting employment if you are not employed. And the second thing is a social stigma if you have been incarcerated or imprisoned. There's also a social stigma. This man went to jail. And people don't want that. Let me just give you one example. Uh, this was, I think, in 1983. And I was in my first year of BA. And I used to go to a club, a literary club in the YMCA, which is called Uni Y. Uni Y. Uni stood for university. Y stood for YMCA. So it was a literary club where we had debates, quizzes, group discussions, all the activities that nobody does anymore. Okay. And it was a very vibrant thing. And we met every Friday. And when I became the secretary in 83, I was still in my first year of BA. It was my duty to send circulars to the members of the Univy. Okay, so we had decided that the next week we will have a discussion on the then separatist Sikh agitation for Khalistan, the demand for that. So we wanted to have a discussion on that and how that was not a correct thing, and the Sikhs have always been a part of India, and they are the pride of India and all that. So why should they ask for a separate Khalistan? So we decided, so let's have a discussion on this. So to remind people, I sent a circular, signed it, and the circular in those days we used to do cyclostyling. So you had this thing called a stencil, which you put into a typewriter and typed it out. And then you would put in a cyclostyle machine and put paper, much like your printer, and you turn it manually, and the circular, the printed matter will come out. So we put them in envelopes, went to the GPO, put stamps on them, and set them off as a reminder. And the topic of discussion said Khalistan and its problems for India, or something like that. Uh, so this was scheduled for Friday. So we went there on Friday, and the secretary of the YMCA walked in. He walked in with a gentleman who was middle-aged, probably, I don't know, I can't remember too clearly now, probably in his 30s or late 30s. And he said, we have a special guest. He'd like to watch the proceedings. I said, okay. So we had our discussion. And after we had our discussion, this gentleman quietly left. And the secretary of the YMCA then called me. And he said, do you know who that person was? I said, I have no clue. You said that this is a special guest. He's sitting here to watch the proceedings. So I was actually a little surprised. Who is this man who wants to watch our proceedings? What is it that we are doing so wonderful that he wants to watch us? He said that man is from the Central Bureau of Intelligence. And I was stunned. I said, what do you mean he was from the Central Bureau of Intelligence? Not even the police, mind you. Central Bureau of Intelligence. And so I was a little stunned. I said, why was he here? He said, on Wednesday, he came looking for you. I said, I was scared then. Just imagine somebody from the Central Bureau of Intelligence is looking for you. Okay. And I said, but why was he looking for me? What have I done? He said somehow he got a copy of the circular that you sent out on Khalistan, the discussion on Khalistan. And what he wanted to know was, who is this Satish Chandra, A.B. Satish Chandra? Why is he organizing a discussion on Khalistan? So apparently Solomon, that is the name of the secretary of the YMCA, he told him that's a literary club, and they discuss current affairs and all that. And these are harmless people. They are not insurrectionists. There's nobody is a supporter of Khalistan. And so that man, I believe, said, he said, will you give me Satish Chandra's phone number? So the secretary said, listen, if you are so suspicious, why don't you come back on Friday? Come back on Friday and listen to what these people are discussing. So he came back on Friday. He sat through the session, heard the whole discussion, and when he was satisfied that there was nothing in the nature of sedition or insurrectionary, he left. But that put several fears in my head. One, am I now on the list of the Central Bureau of Investigation as a person to watch? Two, is this, at that time I wanted to become an IAS officer. And I said, is this going to stand in the way of my getting employment? And if some trouble happens in the name of Khalistan, will I be picked up and put in jail? And there was this draconian legislation called the National Security Act, which didn't even give the right to habeas corpus. The right to habeas corpus is that you have to be produced in a court of law within 24 hours of your arrest. You have to be produced either in a court of law or in front of a judge. And according to the provisions of the NSA and now the UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, you can be detained. Nobody will be told that you've been picked up. You can be detained. You don't have to be produced in court. And I was afraid. Well, something like this happened to me. And the other day, day before yesterday, people in Delhi were arrested for commenting on the Prime Minister's performance under UAPA. The UAPA is an act that is aimed at preventing people going against the state of India, talking about dividing the state, those kind of things. So what do? If you criticize the government, you're exercising your right to freedom of speech, which has been constitutionally given to you. It has been constitutionally given to you. You can say that I think Mr. Modi is not a very effective prime minister, or that the state, the government is fudging figures. Yesterday's newspaper says that figures of death, the state government is doing it. So you can express your ideas on these things. This is not sedition. This is not insurrection. So why are you being arrested under UAPA? That is the question. And look at what Jagan is doing with that Raghu Ramakrishnam Raju. He's been booked under sedition. How, I don't know. But he's been booked under sedition. So you are afraid of many things. Like I said, if you take my own case, I was so afraid that finally I caught hold of a friend of mine whose uncle was working in the CBI. I found out about the name of the man who came, and I wanted to know if my name was on the list of the CBI. And that man took 3 days, and he said, first when we approached him to ask him, he said, forget it. These so many things like this happen. But I said, no, I'm very anxious. I would like to know if I'm on that. Then 3 days later, he said, no, I spoke to that chap. And in fact, he quite liked the way you conducted the session and your patriotism and all that, blah, blah. But that is scary. So that is what we mean by the fear that is generated in you through legality. It is through legality that the repressive state apparatus, again a coinage of Louis Althusser, this works in conjunction with legality. So that's why he says tier 1 is law and legality. Tier 2 is the political or politics. So the superstructure is not one legal superstructure, one legal political superstructure. 2 tiers. It's a 2-tiered structure, superstructure. And it draws compliance out of the people by taking recourse to coercion. Okay? You understand coercion, coercion. It takes recourse to coercion. Later on, people have given the same repressive state apparatus a name like coercive state apparatus. Okay? And the repressive state apparatus undermines democracy. The example that I have given you now of the UAPA, okay? The example that I've given you of that will basically tell you that a law can be made and it can be used against people who are inconvenient to the administration, to the people in government. Okay, so this is one side of the repressive state apparatus. The other side of it is the police. You have people coming together. You have the rapid action force landing up immediately. Vajra, the water cannon coming up. What do they do? A lathi charge, firing rubber bullets, tear gas shells, all these in order to control people, disband them if they are all coming together. All these things are done by the police. Okay? And the police is one of the primary, very, very primary sources of the repressive state apparatus, as far as Louis Althusser is concerned. Louis Althusser also drew upon a particular idea. This is not his idea, but he drew upon it. Deep state. Now, deep state is a direct translation of a Turkish expression derin devril. Okay, so derin devril, what does that mean? It means the deep state, literally. So what exactly is the deep state? It is not just intelligence agencies, also extra constitutional means. It's called deep because you don't get to see them in action. But the deep state is there all around you. This happened in the 1920s. Can somebody tell me what happened in the 1920s? An earth-shattering event happened in Turkey. Akshay Puneet?
Khilafat movement.
Khilafat movement happened in India in support to the Turkish. Yeah, but you're right. It is. But why did the Khilafat movement happen?
Sir, Khalifa, the religious head of the Muslims,
Hmm.
the Britishers are um, removing that religious head because in opposition to that, Muslims of India did that movement. Even Mahatma Gandhi also supported.
Yeah, that is India. I'm asking what happened in Turkey. I agree about the Khilafat movement. But what happened in Turkey? The Ottoman Empire, OTTOMAN, the Ottoman Empire finally collapsed. And the Ottoman Empire was deeply fundamentalist in its Islamic ways. And it was at that time that you had this man. I hope you have heard of him. Have you heard of Kemal Ataturk?
Sir Mustafa Kemal Pasha, is it same?
Mustafa Kemal Pasha Ataturk. Yes, same. Hmm.
He was the president of Turkey.
So what did he do? What did he do?
To my knowledge, he is a man eater.
No, no,
Cannibal.
no. That's not Ataturk. You're talking about that Ugandan dictator. What's his name? Mm, how did I forget his name?
Idi Amin.
Idi Amin. Idi Amin was, accused of being a cannibal. And at one level, Idi Amin was an entertaining character. Um, he used to travel in a palanquin that was carried, and he was a huge fellow, bigger than I am. Hmm? Huge fellow, sitting like a king and eating in the palanquin, while white people carried his palanquin. So his idea was, I'm taking revenge on the whites. They worked us as slaves, now I'm going to work you as slaves. So he actually made white people slaves. All the people in his huge palace were servants in the palace were all white people. They used to get regularly whipped if they did something wrong. And after some time, they didn't, even if they didn't do anything wrong, he would get them whipped, because he said the blacks were whipped, so now I'll whip the whites. And so he was supposed to be also a cannibal. That hasn't been proved. But yes, uh, you're talking about Idi Amin, not about Kemal Ataturk. Kemal Ataturk actually oversaw the westernization of Turkey. Okay, he oversaw the westernization of Turkey. He forged bond. He created intelligence agencies which were unknown to people. Okay, unknown to people. Today, like for example, uh, intelligence agencies, like we know that internally uh, it is the IB in India, which is the Intelligence Bureau, that takes care of intelligence in India, within the country. And it works in conjunction with the CBI and our external intelligence is RAW, Research and Analysis Wing. Okay, and we have the Inter-Services Intelligence in Pakistan, which is also an intelligence agency, and they export terror to India. And if you take the case of the US, internal intelligence is taken care of by the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Intelligence, and external intelligence is taken care of by uh, the Central Intelligence Agency as well as by the Defense Intelligence Agency. And it is believed that there are a few other intelligence agencies that are active, but people don't know of their existence and their names. Okay, that's what it is believed. When it was the Soviet Union, it had the KGB, Komitet Gossidurie Stevenoi Bezopeznotsy. This is in the de-Stalinization period under Nikita Khrushchev. But the agency that preceded it was called the NKVD. I can't remember what the NKVD stood for, so you'll have to pardon me for that. So that was there, the NKVD, it became the KGB. And then in India also now you have the National Intelligence Agency. Ever since we've had terror attacks, so there is a thing called NIA, which deals specifically with terror, the idea of terror modules who maybe are hiding, or even those that are called cells. Okay, they are called cells because they are hiding. They, till their time comes to act, they live a normal life, and they could be your friends. But when they have to be triggered, then they are triggered. So the NIA has the specific mandate to take care of those kind of people. So now Kemal Ataturk created intelligence agencies to take care of fundamentalists who stood in the way of the uh, way of progress and westernization. He also took the help of MI6 and the CIA. He took the help of these in order to quell any dissent against Turkey that was happening in different countries, like in India, the Khilafat movement. Okay, so, and it was the repression of the Khilafat movement by the British that led to the Mopla rebellion in Kerala, in which they massacred a number of Hindus. I told you that story. I'm not going to repeat that. Anyway, so that is the deep state. The state, the apparatus of the state that you cannot see. And this apparatus is repressive. It is active 24 hours a day, and it is something that takes care of uh, people who tend to rebel against the state. So that is the thing that is why he makes two tiers. One is the legal that everyone can see. The political part of it is not something that everyone can see. In fact, most of it, except perhaps for a little bit of police uh, brutality, you don't get to see the rest of it. That's why he says the superstructure should be seen as a two-tiered thing. Now, then he talks about the ideological state apparatus. Now, whatever the state wants is the ideology of the state. Okay, that is how uh, Althusser defines the ideological in the ideological state apparatus. It wants to perpetuate a certain kind of thought. It wants to perpetuate a certain kind of thought and compliance among the people, not through repression, but through subtle means, which are akin to an unconscious brainwashing. Okay, you remember the arguments I have given to you about socialization. I hope you do, because that is what is the argument that Althusser uses in the ideological state apparatus. Okay, he says that the state is continually working on the minds of the people and socializing them in a particular way so that they start believing that what they are thinking and what they are doing is true. So he says at one time, the ideological state apparatus was the church. He says it was the church. The state used the church. He's basically talking about the Anglican Church and how it used the church to infuse ideas of capitalism, the ideas of liberalism, and all that into the minds of people. Okay. Then he says the church has, in the 20th century, for some time, the church was something that operated in the various Christian countries. But from the middle of the 20th century, somewhere around there, to the time when he wrote this essay on ideology in 1970, he says gradually educational institutions were used for this purpose of socializing children. The whole activity starts not with adults, but it starts with children. Okay, it starts with children and the kind of curriculum that is made. The kind of curriculum that is made for children is not in the hands of schools. It is in the hands of the government. The government decides what will be taught. It makes the curriculum. So when it makes the curriculum, it makes it in such a way that it tells the children a story that it wants them to hear and get socialized according to that and start believing that what their thoughts are actually their own. They start believing that they're their own. That is actually a point in interpellation, but I thought I'll just get through this. And they are socialized into compliance. Not only into compliance, but actively aiding and abetting the ideological state apparatus. Now, the very interesting point that Althusser makes is while the repressive state apparatus is something that is seen in the state, in the institutions of the state, the ideological state apparatus is not seen in the institutions of the state, but it is seen in the institutions of civil society. And here he's using civil society as it was used by Gramsci. Okay, when Marx said civil society is nothing but the bourgeois class and its society, Gramsci, Antonio, Gramsci, it's actually Gramsci, but while pronouncing it becomes Gramsci. It's Gramsci, and Antonio Gramsci said it doesn't have to be, just a bourgeois. He says even church-going communities can be civil society. Members who get together in the public sphere in order to discuss issues can be civil society. So that particular definition Althusser takes into consideration while he's talking about the ideological state apparatus. So the ideological state apparatus works in the civil society. If you want to know more about the civil society, please attend my classes in the evenings. Again, I'm not making a sales pitch. We didn't really have time to discuss these things now. If you want a detailed discussion on that, I'll do it in the evening classes where there's a lot more freedom. Otherwise, I'll do a bit of it anyway while we are doing Locke, Rousseau, and Hegel. But Hegel is next semester. This semester we'll do Locke and Rousseau, but I'll do it very briefly. I won't get into the depth of that. If you want to understand those, you can attend my evening classes. It's entirely voluntary, no force. Anyway, so the ideological state apparatus works at the level of civil society. That is what he says. And it is through civil society that compliance is drawn. So the structures of language which convey a certain content. See, for example, you can know somebody's attitude to something. If this was an example that was given by Professor Sudipto Kaviraj, who was my teacher and my academic hero. He still is my academic hero. And Sudipto Kaviraj says that the way people use language itself gives away their belief system. The example that he gave us was, if a newspaper puts a headline which says the forests of what was that area that he talked about? Madhya Pradesh. Okay, the forests of Madhya Pradesh are infested with Naxalites. He says the usage of infest. What is infestation? Actually, we think it is insects. It's not. Okay. We say I've had an infestation of the woodworm. They're eating away. But that's not the original meaning of infestation. Infestation is being possessed by a demonic spirit or spirits. So when you say somebody like the Naxalites are infesting the forests, then what are you saying? Your attitudes to the Naxalites, towards the Naxalites, sorry, is already clear. Okay, you see them either as demons or as harmful insects. You don't have to read the article to find out that the writer of the article has no sympathy for the Naxalites. Right? So it is how we convey. Now look at the whole tussle that is happening about history. Look at the tussle that is happening about history writing. I was on the board of studies to make syllabi for St. Francis. And when I was on the board of studies for St. Francis, I was called for a syllabus meeting. And there was a Muslim teacher there who raised a question. People teach about ancient India, and when it came to political thought, Indian political thought, she said, people talk about ancient India and straight away come to modern India. Why don't people talk about medieval India? I said, very valid question. Very, very valid question. But I want to ask you something. Do you have a copy of your history syllabus? She said, no. I said, get a copy of the history syllabus. See the way the history syllabus is made. There is the discussion of the Mughal Empire. There is a discussion of the Qutub Shahis. There is a discussion of the Asif Jahis. There is a discussion of Siraj-ud-Dawla. There is a discussion of the slave dynasty, Qutbuddin Aibak, Alauddin Khilji. Did you see a syllabus anywhere that teaches Cholas, Rashtrakutas, Cheras, Pandyas, Krishnadevaraya, and the Vijayanagara dynasty? Which history book teaches these? So see, that is a convenient division. And anyway, there's no Islamic political thought because Islam doesn't recognize a realm called the political. So the one person that we are supposed to study, you'll be studying him, Ziauddin Barni. He wanted Hindus to be slaughtered. I said, do you want us to teach that and spread communal disharmony already in a society where, all these one-upmanship things are happening? So if you look at the ideological state apparatus, if you look at educational institutions, the curriculum itself now has become a bone of contention. What are we going to teach? What are we going to teach and how are we going to teach this? Are we going to say the Aryans came from the plains of Hungary through Central Asia? Or are we going to say they originated here? The present dispensation wants to say that they originated here. There's no evidence of that. So you see, this is how ideology works as far as Althusser is concerned. The state is trying to promote through educational institutions, through other kinds of societies which have interaction between people. It's trying to encourage a discourse which is convenient to it. And it starts at a very young age. And that is the reason why he used this term interpellation. This is a bit of a word play on interpolation. Okay, instead of saying interpolation, he is saying interpellation. Interpolation is inserting something in between what already exists. But for him, interpellation starts right from the moment you're a baby. The ideological state apparatus starts working on you through your parents, through your teachers, and it legitimizes itself. The ideological state apparatus legitimizes itself or legitimates itself by putting these ideas into your head at a very young age. And as you grow up with these ideas and you basically start believing that you are the one who is what should I say? You are the one who is generating these particular ideas. Okay, you start believing that these are not ideas that have been put into your head by someone. It is something that has been your idea. So it is interpellation is how our cultural values are internalized, not just into individuals, but into big numbers of people. Not just into 1, 2, 3 individuals. No, it would like to do it in our attitudes, say, towards gender, towards class, towards caste, towards race. And he therefore says interpellations should be seen as not political processes, but as social processes which are initiated by a political institution called the state. The state initiates it, but it puts those ideas in the form of cultural ideas and our attitudes, and we are encouraged to accept these from an early age so that we start believing that these are our own ideas, and we start playing a certain kind of a role in society. So this idea of interpellation has to be seen in conjunction with the ideological state apparatus. Okay, and he says texts because he is in 1970s. Mainly people read what should we say, books. That was the main form of knowledge and possibly even recreation. Okay, so I remember there was a circulating library near my house, and in this particular circulating library we used to have girls who are in their teens coming and borrowing Mills and Boon series of romantic novels, while the boys read some other kind of stuff. Okay, so libraries were there, circulating libraries, memberships were there, and people actually read a lot of books. They actually read a lot of books. So now he says, while reading, you should take into cognizance that there are two kinds of readers. One which he calls a close reader. The close, C-L-O-S-E, not closed. Okay. A close reader is one who considers all the deep meanings that are there in a book, whether it's a book of literature, a book of philosophy. Okay. And this reader reads things searching for deeper meanings and he becomes a passive, absorbent of the ideology of the state. So this is one process of interpellation. But he says this is sometimes broken by a type of reader that he calls the resisting reader. The closed reader is looking for all kinds of deep meanings, whether they exist or not, and he wants to be incorporated. He sees every text as being meaningful. Whereas the resisting reader is the one who reads every idea critically. He reads every idea critically, rejects those ideas which he thinks are not to his liking or that he doesn't believe in them. So he is the person who has escaped and will continue to escape this interpellation. But he says this is a minuscule minority. This is a minuscule minority. It is essentially the ideological state apparatus, the ideological state apparatus that works as a social processes. And therefore, he says structurally, both in terms of the structures of society and in terms of the structures of state, as well as structures of society and state is one kind of structure. The structure of language. Okay, how do you describe Akbar? You'll say he was secular, he married Hindus, his minister was Jai Singh, his chief of armed forces was Man Singh. So that very language conveys to you that Akbar was a tolerant king, emperor. Whereas you don't get that picture when you read about Aurangzeb, right? So structures of language and the structures of state and society, through this interpellation, are the ones that perpetuate an existing ideology, which is the ideology of those in power. And therefore, he claims that this is not something that can be overcome. There might be a few resisting readers, but they are taken care of by legalities, by the repressive state apparatus. They are taken care of by that. So that brings us to the end of Althusser. It brings us to the end of ideology in the Marxist context. You can see this. I hope you have been seeing these together. Marx thought it could be overcome. Althusser says, I'm sorry, it cannot be overcome. Ideology will persist. And it is not even if it is false consciousness. Maybe. In fact, I've left out something because it's getting to be too tedious. He has two theses of ideology. Let me just finish them, and otherwise I'll have a guilt hanging over my head. Just after making a profound statement, no pain, no gain, Madame Padma has disappeared. She said,
Sir, I'm here.
I thought you had disappeared. This is
No,
too
no,
much pain. No, nothing to gain, just pain.
no, sir. It was more of gain and less of pain. I'm happy.
Yeah, so just let me explain these very quickly. I'll go through these, then I'll have the satisfaction that I did a proper job. So please bear with me for just another couple of minutes. So we have this thing called the two. Why do I press all kinds of things? Why? I don't know. Okay. So two theses. The plural is written with an E. The singular is written with an I. Okay. Two theses of ideology. One of which Althusser agrees with Marx. He says ideology, let me put it here. This is Althusser saying it. Ideology masks reality. Okay, that he's agreeing with Marx, not the false consciousness bit. Ideology masking reality, that he agrees with Marx. And the second thing that he talks about is ideology is not spatial or representational, but physical. This is his second thesis. This is the complicated one. When you say something which is spatial, what you're saying is ideology represents a certain kind of a space. There's also actually, I forgot to put that. But he says it is temporal because it changes with time. It's not spatial and it's not representational. It's not something that is sitting in your head as a representational thing. It is your physical existence, your body, and mind coming together in order to believe in this process of interpellation, except for that second category of reader that I talked about. Okay, except for that particular kind of a person, with everyone else, it is something which is like a close reader looking for deep meanings that pertain to both mind and one's physical existence. And that is why he says it is body. It pertains to our physical existence. We associate all these with our physical existence. So they're not just some kind of symbolic representations. Symbolic representations. They are not that. Okay. So they are physical. They are physical because it's your mind and body together believing in it. It's not individual because it works on as big a population as possible. Our Modi bucks today are a wonderful example of how ideology works. You know, people are dying. There is no cremating. There's no wood. There are horrible things happening, like selling medicines in the black market. You're doing everything in the black market. And what does the IT cell of the BJP do? It sends out this thing. Don't look at the number of people who have died. Don't look at the number of people who are ill. Look at the number of people who have recovered. Look at the number of people who have not been touched by COVID. Now, is that because of the state policy that people have not been touched by COVID? Is that it? I don't think so. But black marketing of medicines, essential medicines, jumping queues in order to get a bed in a hospital just because you have money and somebody else doesn't have. You want me to ignore all that and concentrate on this? This is a deliberate attempt to, so I'm the resisting reader. I'm the resisting reader. I'm not taking, yeah, such wonderful things are happening. Yes, so many people have not been touched by COVID. In GHMC, even if there are 4,000 cases, well, so what? Okay, this is a city of 1 crore people. In that, if 4,000 get COVID, why are you worried? I am worried because my mother's family, her cousins who had passed away a few years ago, their descendants, 2 families consisting of nearly 15 people, have been wiped out completely in a matter of days. Those people are gone. Absolutely gone. That is shocking. 15 of my relatives just died, one after another, in a matter of a few hours, 14 hours. And you want me to look at the recovery rate? Really? Seriously. So it's not just representational as far as he is concerned. That is enough for today. Thank you very much. I need one clarification. When you send this emoticon or whatever this thing is called, what does it mean? I don't know what it means. That's why I'm asking you.
That raising hands thing, sir.
Yeah, like
Uh,
this.
well, it depends on the context who sends, but it generally means if you say a good thing or a great saying, like, good kind of, oh wow, raise hands, take a bow type, I
Oh,
guess.
okay. No, I just wanted to know because I suddenly found myself doing this a lot
Okay.
while teaching today. And I was wondering what it means because I get messages from my nieces
Hmm.
and they always use this. And
Yeah. So definitely in this case, kind of great only.
okay.
It's blessing, I think. No, Padma?
Blessing one fingers will be like crossed, a bend type. But if they are straight,
This, yeah,
it means kind of,
whatever.
yeah.
Okay.
Sir, you ask them, sir. They will say clearly.
Ask whom? My cousins, my
Your
nieces.
nieces.
The problem with them is they send a message when they like, and when I send a message back, they don't reply. They are wonderful, my nieces. They are very, very amazing. Okay.
People use sarcastically also, sir, these emojis. So it is up to us how to
Yeah.
view them.
Knowing my nieces, they are probably doing it sarcastically. I think they have severe contempt. Okay. Thank you. It's been a long class. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And
Thank you, sir.
yeah, so tomorrow we move to liberalism, which I will go through very quickly because unless I do liberalism, I cannot do libertarianism and Rawlsian liberalism. So I'll do it very briefly and very quickly because we have to do it in detail in the Western political thought paper when we start doing John Locke. Okay, so that is when I'll do it in detail. But tomorrow I'll do it in a jiffy, just like that, and go on to libertarianism. And yeah, that's it.
So, sir, once we start libertarianism, we'll be covering all the things in first unit.
Hopefully, that is my hope. Before
Okay.
before this thing is over, because I cannot do any of those things in detail, especially the first unit. I cannot do any of them in detail because they all basically need you to know a number of things that are there in your second semester. Okay,
Okay.
so which
This is all
was
so complicated
it
to
is a
understand the syllabus itself for us.
it is a I'm sorry to say this, but it's a bird brain activity that led to this. And I'm kept out of the board of studies because then they'll say this fellow will object and he'll say put this and he'll say put that, remove this. So they don't let me into it. They do things the way they want to. But I'm happy at least they let me teach these papers because no, seriously,
Yeah.
seriously. I'm happy that they let me teach these papers. Though, if they look at this, they'll say, is this the syllabus we made? That's the question that'll come into their head. So, okay then. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, see you tomorrow.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.